Welcome back. Well, a week ago, they were still in lockdown by police order. Today, MPs aimed for a normal caucus meeting. Let's find out if there's a new normal on the Hill. Ginny Sims is an NDP MP. Aaron O'Toole is a parliamentary secretary for the Conservative government. And Sean Casey is a Liberal MP. Welcome to you all. Nice to have you in the studio this Wednesday. It was a little problematic last week. Ginny, tell me a bit about what it was like going into caucus today. Was there a different atmosphere, a strange atmosphere? How did it come across to you?
Well, we actually, on Thursday morning, I think it was a very smart move on the part of our whip and House Leader. We actually went into the caucus room before we went into Parliament. And I, having been a councillor for many years of my life, that was a very important thing to do on Thursday. So we walked in, we had about half an hour together to hug, to talk, and just to talk about some of the feelings that were there. But today, it was still different, you know, and we walked in and there was a certain amount of emotion, tension. Everybody copes with trauma and tragic incident like this in a different way. And what I want to say to people is there is no right or wrong way. And what people are going to go through are all the stages of grieving, as we do when any tragedy hits us. But today, walking in and seeing that bullet,
a bullet hole
on
right
the
in the
door, was quite a kind of, it hit you in a different way.
Aaron, I know you're not supposed to talk about what goes on in your caucus meeting, but I think we can make an exception here. What was it like in there?
Well, I think the caucus meeting, similar to Ginny, it was important for us, more so that we could show support for one another. There was a lot of hugs before the meeting started. A lot of people expressed thanks to their colleagues for looking out for them and comforting them, and to the Prime Minister for his remarks that evening. You know, because he came after he spoke to the nation, he came and joined MPs actually from all parties and spent a couple of hours sort of talking to them, comforting them. So it's times like this, sometimes we're opposite teams and we're in the sort of full combat of the House of Commons, but we're also friends and colleagues. And so today our caucus was really about that. A lot of people shared their experiences, in some cases, you know, their ways they're dealing with it, thanking other members that helped them. And it's a time for us to check in on one another. One of my colleagues, Rob Clark, is a Mountie who's suffered from PTSD from a shooting from his police career, and he's been looking into a lot of our colleagues over the last week, talking about it in the House as well. I think we need, as Ginny said, to let people know that there's support out there for them.
Sean?
I would say the situation for us was probably a little bit different because at that time last week we were spread out through the building as opposed to right on the second floor with the shooting happening outside the hallway. So I'm quite interested to hear from both my colleagues here. It's not to minimize what took place or the trauma that everyone went through, but I don't think there's any question that being in that hallway, it would have been much more difficult for the NDP and for the Conservatives. Myself, I was on the 5th floor with the Atlantic Caucus, and their regional caucuses are sort of spread through the building. So today, for us, there was a somber mood in caucus, but I would attribute that somber mood more to the fact that about 25% of our caucus attended that funeral yesterday for Corporal Cirillo.
Absolutely.
And so there was a somber mood more tied to having been over to Hamilton and back than what happened last week. Not to minimize what happened last week, but we weren't right in the middle of it.
A weird debate that's broken out, and I find it a little odd, but they're trying to decide whether this gunman's attack, Michael Zihav-Bibo, whether it was a terrorist attack or that of a mentally unhinged rogue warrior, if you will. Ginny, your leader doesn't think this was a terrorist, even though the RCMP say it was, and Justin Trudeau says it was, and Stephen Harper says it was. Why don't you think this guy was a terrorist, or at least terrorist intent?
From my perspective, I'm quite prepared to let the RCMP do their investigation. They are the experts.
And they say it's a terrorist
And right
attack.
now, I don't want to jump to too many conclusions. A lot of the stuff that was written about this incident points to a person who is very disturbed, mentally disturbed, a person who tried to get help, but it wasn't made available to him. I'm not excusing any of the things that happened. What happened was absolutely terrible, unacceptable, whatever name we give it. But absolutely a person who was born, grew up in Canada, had drug addiction problems from what we've heard so far, and I'm only going with what we've read, and also did get into problems with the police and talking with people, hearing that he didn't want to be released, he wanted to be kept in prison, and needed help. So for me, from a counseling perspective, I think right now the tragic part is we're all still mourning the tragic death of Corporal Cirillo. We're also trying to support each other, and I can tell you for some people it's black humor, and for some people it's tears. But right now I'm quite prepared to let the RCMP finish their investigation and then
But they're the ones calling it a terrorist. I don't want to argue with it, because the criminal code says an act of violence for political, religious, or ideological purposes. Seems like that's what this guy was doing, but what's your take, Aaron?
Well, in fact, you quoted that, Don. Thank you. It says in whole or in part motivated by political, religious, or other things intending to intimidate. What happened last week is the tragic attack on Parliament, but we lost 2 soldiers for the only simple reason that they were wearing a uniform in the Canadian Forces. Warrant Officer Vincent and Nathan Cirillo weren't attacked for who they were. They were attacked for what their uniform represented. So inherently that's terrorism. This criminal code says it's terrorism. The RCMP says it's terrorism. I'm not sure where Mr. Mulcair is trying to stop the logical connection to what this is. We still have to learn more about him, and was he assisted, was he radicalized online or by people, learn more about his circumstances, but let's move past this ridiculous position that it's not terrorism. I think Canadians who followed the events last week and saw the death of 2 of our soldiers know that they were acts of terror, and that we've got to be vigilant.
Sean, if you were in a courtroom and you're a lawyer, you could you argue that this guy was a terrorist and get a conviction?
Yes. Quite simply, the RCMP has said that he's a terrorist, or that this was an act of terrorism, and we trust their judgment. So at a political level, I don't think it needs to go any further than that, and I also think that the RCMP would choose their words carefully, and they are words that would stand up in court.
I want to move on to it's an interesting debate. There's bullet holes all over the Hall of Honor, both from the police as well as the Sergeant at Arms, and of course the gunman himself. As you pointed out, Ginny, went right in the door. They went right through the door into the NDP caucus room. Some people think they should be preserved, sort of a reminder of what happened. Some think cover it up. This is not a place to display violence. Sean, what's your take on that?
I agree with the latter point of view. I think that they should be cleaned up. This isn't a place to display violence. This will become part of the history of the place, but I think there has to be a better way to commemorate it than to leave the damage intact. And I'm sure that there are people that will think of a suitable way to commemorate the heroism of Kevin Vickers and the security staff and the RCMP. Maybe it's the naming of a room. I don't know what it is, but I don't think that leaving the damage intact is the right way. It sends the right message. And I would hope that very soon we forget the name of the fellow who did this. And I think by putting forward some sort of an act of commemoration or some sort of a monument to the people who we should remember would be doing the right thing.
Jenny Sims?
You know what, it's not on the top of my list, and I'm actually even surprised it's come up at this time. And I have no position on it, and right now I think I'm still at that stage of, going through the different stages you do after an event like this, thinking about my colleagues, thinking about the families who've lost their loved ones, and I don't see it as a commemoration, I don't see it as a celebration, but at the same time...
But you have to make the decision now, because they're going to repair the damage if someone doesn't decide.
Yeah, but you know what, I'll be honest, Don, it's like at the bottom of the list of things I want to worry about.
Aaron?
I agree with Sean. I think we should get it back to the Hall of Honor we know. I had my family, my children in the hall today to watch the Speaker's procession before Parliament. It's only the second time here since I was elected. It's a pristine and beautiful part of our Parliament. Should be restored to that. I agree, commemorating. The Hall of Honor remains the Hall of Honor. And Kevin Vickers and other security actions were in line with honor and valor and bravery. And so I think their actions and commemorating that is another way of honoring the hall itself in Parliament. So I'd like to see a commemoration, and let's get the hall back to what it was like.
Well said all. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in, and we're sure glad you're doing okay. Everyone seems we're starting to get closure on this, hopefully.